What is going on, people? It is good to have you back on board. It is another episode of Unfiltered coming your way right here, right now. Officially, this will go down as episode number 315 in your scorecard. You can jump on board 24/7, 365. It is easy. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. You can go to Twitter or X if you call it that, at Casey Stern. Jump on board, give me a follow. You get all the news and notes and plenty of stuff on all the podcasts and then some there. And you can get into the bio and follow through to our Instagram at Unfiltered with Casey Stern and our YouTube page, Unfiltered with Casey Stern. And on the YouTube page, you'll get 315 plus episodes of this show. You'll get Bleav in Mets. You'll get NBA Coast to Coast. You'll get some shenanigans and all sorts of other stuff as well. So jump on board, like, subscribe, and get over there on the YouTube side of things. Today, plain and simple, there were 58 trades, 30 of them made in the last 24 hours. It was a busy deadline. Some of the big names that many people expected could be moved were not. That is often the case. And a lot of it is predicated on, and we'll get into this today, why the market was a little slower on the big names and the fact that there are just so many teams that are still not sure where they fit, in it accidentally, not willing to sell, not willing to turn over and forget about 2024. And it also enabled some teams to be some of the biggest winners on the seller side, because normally when you talk about winners at the deadline, people navigate towards the buyers. I'm not just going to do that today. We're going to get into the sellers, and there were one or two that stand out that were big winners at this deadline as well. We'll talk about losers. We'll talk about who did what and who didn't. And as always, I would like your comments. So whether you're watching on Facebook or on Instagram or on YouTube, or you're listening, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, or watching on X, and all those platforms will have this show. Want to hear from you. Give me your comments. Send me a DM. Shoot me a reply and let me know your thoughts on how your team did heading up into the trade deadline. We always let you know we are here in large part thanks to our good friends of BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all of your online sports betting needs. Right now, get a 50% free bet up to $250 on your first deposit. I'm betting anything from the Olympics, baseball, Formula One racing, whatever you name it, they've got it. BetOnline's also got every stat, matchup, and live odd and spread while the games are being played. And then after, get it over the online casino, blackjack, poker, 150 slot games. It's all there for you. So head over to the website today. Get in on the action. Use the promo code Bleav. That's BLEAV. You'll get a 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. It is Bet Online. The game starts here, and we start here. This was a deadline that was very, very busy. People always complaining, oh, the deadline, there's all this hubbub and moves aren't made. You get 30 trades in the last 24 hours. You got to feel pretty good about that if you get excited about the trade deadline. As hello, Mr. Prospects are cool, parades are cooler. You know I do each and every year. But I want to start with that because there are a lot of people sitting there and tweeting at me, as happens every year. And, shout out and thank you to all the people who are using the line wrong, or at least, somewhat crediting me. It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I get upset every year where people kind of misunderstand what this is. If you don't have a chance to win a World Series, you should not push the pedal down to the level that teams should who have a chance to win the World Series. And if we're being legitimate about it, yeah, we had 2 wild cards in there last year. Yeah, anything can happen when you get in. So no, I'm not telling you if you're a Met fan or whoever else in the category of teams, and I'd put them there, that I think are playoff teams but are not World Series contenders this year, that you don't have a chance, because of course you got a chance. Guys could step up. Anything can happen, especially when you're talking about 3 out of 5 in a series, for example, knocking off teams like we saw the Diamondbacks do in 3 days against the Dodgers a year ago. Anything can happen. But that doesn't mean you're mortgaging your future. And even if you can push the pedal down and win, doesn't mean you have to, for example, and I said this, and Mark Feinstein on this show, go back and listen, said this, there's no way Jackson Holliday was getting traded. You don't have to make those kind of deals. It doesn't mean I don't care about any prospects that are on my franchise. I don't care about trading anybody. Let's just go for it. Let's win now. Let's forget it doesn't mean that. It means if I got a chance to win, I'm pushing those chips. And we had some teams do that, and we had some teams not. We had some teams do practically or literally nothing. I'm going to bounce around, no particular order. put a bunch of notes down on some of these that I want to handle, and we'll get into it. And again, anything that I miss or anything that you want to hear me react to or any thoughts you have, want to hear from you, get to me, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. You could jump in on Twitter or X, if you will, at Casey Stern, and get to me there. Let's start with immediate impact and go from there, because already we have seen that, right? And the infusion of energy that comes from trades. And that's part of why, if you go to deadlines past, I think back to, and I've covered many of these, Jose Bautista and the Jays speaking up about being so close in the race. I think they were 2 behind the Orioles maybe at the time, maybe 2014. And at the deadline, they don't go make any moves. And they talk about, hey, how do you not do anything for us? And all of a sudden, they're 15 out by the time the season is over. Dallas Keuchel, when he was with the Astros, in a year that eventually they went and got Verlander at the waiver deadline. Jeff Luhnow pulls that deal, but they didn't make it. At the regular trade deadline, they didn't do enough and would have gone home. So I think back to those situations, among others, and you think about the energy, and then you watch Tommy Pham hit a grand slam in his first at-bat for the Cardinals. You watch Hayes hit a big 3-home run for the Phillies, and you think about Jazz Chisholm at the front of this, and let's start there. 2 multi-homer games already, breaking all sorts of marks for guys in the first 3-4 games of a franchise. And the electricity he has brought has been a difference maker. And you knew this would be a good fit from that standpoint, because this team, look, a lot of Yankee teams in the past can look lame, look dead, look boring. I used to joke about all the time. You'd sit there and you do pregame, and I've done many, and you're on the field, and like one team is sitting there and they're doing their workouts, but they're having a good time. They're laughing at the batting cage. And the Yankees back in the day, when I started covering baseball, early 2000s, and they're sitting there doing a lot of winning, it was like an army, sitting there with the way they did calisthenics, and everything was very professional, which does, look, you should all be professional, but to a way that seemed to be they were having no fun. And it hasn't been a lot of fun since this team jumped out to the 40-21 or 41-20 start, whatever it was, going back through 60 plus games this season. So to bring in a guy who was, clearly unhappy, stuck in Miami where they were in the doldrums, and I say were because maybe that changes. They're one of my big winners at the deadline, sneaking ahead in this podcast. They are. But I go and I think about this whole situation, and he's just a perfect fit from an electricity standpoint. And also the ability to give them power, to give them speed, and the things he does in terms of dynamic ways to a lineup that needed a lot of that. Because for people who are not paying attention, Aaron Judge having another worldly year. I mean, Soto's been great, done everything as advertised, and a guy I think the Yankees will try desperately to keep. But Aaron Judge have an otherworldly season. I mean, he's first in like every category there is, ever was, or will be. And what he's doing is crazy. But they haven't had enough, and they haven't had depth. And now Chisholm, who currently in the middle of the lineup, let's see how they play with that, was a guy who you knew would bring electricity. You knew would bring a different, dynamic aspect to this offense they haven't had. And whether or not he finished number 1 on the overrated list or not, let's be fair, maybe that's because he got, and a lot because he got the cover of MLB The Show, and then people went crazy and talked about all the other players, and there were plenty who were more deserving, and that's not how it works. It's how much these guys are getting paid. By the way, people don't realize that behind the scenes, they get money for being on the cover. There's a lot that goes in on a business dealing standpoint. He probably was not even their first choice, let's be fair. But he gets on that cover, and then all of a sudden, Jazz Chisholm, well, why aren't your numbers that way anymore? And now all of a sudden he's on, like many Yankees are, ironically, usually the most overrated, this and that. And by the way, Bryce Harper been on that list, not comparing the two, so not a big deal. But the question was, where's Chisholm going to play? Now, putting him at third base for Aaron Boone, I love the move. I do. I think it's ballsy, but I love it. I know everybody wants to crap on Aaron Boone. If it doesn't work, obviously that he could sit there and play second. He came up as a shortstop. He'd been in the outfield, but this is their positional need. And the things he can do athletically put him in a position where, it's going to be a learning curve. No, it's not going to be perfect, but he can play this position. He can make the throws. He can field. And oh, by the way, add to the multi-homer games, a dynamic play he made defensively. If you didn't see that, go back and watch as I do this here on a Wednesday, that he made on Tuesday night. I mean, so against the Phillies. So you look at the way Chisholm has started, and it can't work any better. That's one of the moves that clearly stands out. Is it good enough to make the Yankees a winner at the deadline For me, I'm not going there. And I'm not going to announce 8 teams I think are on the winner list. But for me, the problem with the Yankees, when you think about it, is you can't tell me. And look, I think Mark Leiter Jr. will add to their bullpen. I think he will bring something to that group. He's a swing and miss guy. He's going to bring some of that element to that team. They've already got issues, and now you worry about with Holmes blowing games and some of the other stuff. They got problems. But did they do enough? Did they need to add more depth into the rotation? I think they did. Did they need to add more depth into the bullpen? I think they did. Now, at what cost? With a lot of these teams, that's going to be the question. Staying in New York, and we'll get to them later, there are a lot of Met fans who's thinking, how did we not get Jack Flaherty? I wanted to be on Tariq Skubal, who was not moved, and Crochet, who was not moved, and Blake Snell, who was not moved. Well, why weren't these guys moved? And why was Flaherty the best pitcher that was moved at the deadline, even though those names were higher ahead of him? Well, because of what was being asked, because there's leverage for those teams. They didn't have to make those moves. The White Sox can make that deal in an offseason. You can make that deal. An offseason, you don't even have to really, because you still got Skubal. And you can go into next year with him still at the front of your rotation if you're Detroit. So at what cost? So it's easier said than done. I don't know what they would have had to give. I give them, if I'm grading, somewhere in the B to B plus range. I'll stay winners on the A side. The Yankees are close because I think the Chisholm move, even though it's not going to be the level it's been the first 3-4 days, is going to be at a high level. Let's stay American League East. The Baltimore Orioles did a nice job. I don't know if they did a good enough job. Now, does that mean they didn't do a good enough job to go win a World Series? Not saying that, because they just recalled Jackson Holliday, who's the best prospect in baseball. And I think, forget about the 20 at-bats people he had before the season, he's going to be fantastic. And he might be the best player of the group that includes even what we've seen of Rutschman and Henderson when all is said and done. And we're just at the beginning of his career. Was he 20 years old? I mean, come on. But they already have the addition of Burns and what that's done from before the season to change the way their rotation looks going into the postseason comparatively to a year ago. They didn't have a lot to do. So when you look at teams like the Orioles and the Phillies and the Dodgers, that's part of it. But unlike the Dodgers, who are giving this away, clearly in the winner category for me, unlike LA, they didn't do that go for it to the level you want. Now, part of the problem for the Orioles, to be fair, that Mike Elias is facing is, it's like a garage sale. If I don't have a lot of items that you want, I can't really sit there and haggle, and you're not going to bother me, and we can negotiate pretty simply. But if I'm sitting there with all the prospects at my garage sale that the Orioles got, everybody's sitting there and they're asking for all the guys you don't want to move. And you're like, hey, but what about this guy who's number 16 on my list of prospects? I know our system is great, but this guy's great too. And they're like, yeah, that's nice, but I don't want to sit there and eat this hamburger at the Outback. I'd rather go to Morton's, or I'd rather go to Mastro's than ahead of that, or wherever else. I just don't want to shop in your mid-level prospect area because I know the names you got. Then it makes it difficult because you have those names that are there. I think they did a nice job adding depth. I like the Zach Eflin move. And a guy who's had experience, who's been, in big spots before, who will give them some depth, who will be energized. Trevor Rogers, numbers aren't brilliant over the course of the year, but 2 runs or less, 2 earned over less over his last 8 starts, and maybe 9 starts. It might be 9. So he's been great. You add Dominguez, you add Soto, you add a little depth in the relief corps, you add depth in the rotation, the kind of names that you'll need to give you some innings, to give you some versatility when you get to the postseason, and who need to win games when 4th and 5th starters are there on the mound to help, outwill and outlast, to use the survivor thing in the American League East, the Yankees, who will be charging forward and continue to do so and are right there neck and neck with you. So I think for the Orioles, nice job. I don't think they pushed the pedal, as much as I would have liked, but it's hard to use the word, is it enough? Because they already could arguably be in a spot to go get to and win a World Series. So just trying to be fair. Red Sox, not enough for me. I mean, look, the Alex Cora, signing is the biggest thing that had to happen. They got him now for another 3 years, and getting AC and sticking him there still is the biggest thing they needed to do, getting up into the deadline, which was a few days before. But I think, look, Luis Garcia, okay. Danny Jansen will help them certainly and give them some better game calling and, give them, some more options in terms of a bat. that has got a little pop in it from behind the plate. But when I look at the Red Sox, I would have loved to see them jump a little bit more, especially because when you go back to the story before the season began, it was that the Boston Red Sox didn't do enough. It was, what the hell are they doing? They didn't do anything. And, they basically sat on it, laid an egg. And that's why all of us thought when we get to this stupid Netflix documentary, it's going to be terrible because this team's going to be awful. Nobody wants to watch this garbage. And they've been so much better. And they've been such a great story. Would have loved to see them pounce on it a bit. Not surprised necessarily that they didn't. I don't know what really was in the offing for them in terms of what other names. Because again, if the Orioles don't get, Skubal and Crochet and those guys, right? And they've got that kind of system. And the Yankees didn't get them with that urgency. Then how the Red Sox going to outbid and do that? It probably was difficult to do. Maybe a little bit unfair. Would have liked to see a little bit more. But they did okay. I put them in kind of the okay category. The other two teams in the American League East did kind of well. The Jays, I thought, killed it in the Kikuchi deal with the Astros. Look, he's got great stuff. He may be advantageous to them down the stretch. We will see. But the Jays did really well if you look at the prospects they got in that deal. And I thought the Rays kind of killed it. I mean, they're one of the winners too. I mean, the Marlins to me are one of the, if you got to pick two winners that stand out for me at the deadline, the two teams I'm looking at automatically right off jump are the Dodgers and the Marlins from a buyer and a seller perspective, but the Rays are there too. They did a good job, multitude of trades, showing you exactly what is necessary when you're in the spot they're in. They knew what time it was. They understood where they were, and they made the moves accordingly and were able to make a lot of them. And, nobody turns small moves you don't think are big and prospects you never heard of into being guys that you hear about forever better than the Tampa Bay Rays do. So I think Rays and Jays on the other side did a good job. Let's go American League Central. Twins, all going to be about health, hamstrung a little bit financially. They didn't do enough, didn't make deals. We didn't expect them to necessarily. So I don't know if I'm disappointed. I think their fans should be and probably will be. They didn't make moves. Tigers, I don't know if, they pushed the pedal far enough, but I give them a pass because I thought trading Skubal was a terrible idea for me personally. I mean, is that, what are you saying to your franchise and your fan base? I thought this was part of this is going to be the year you're supposed to take steps forward, even though not as much as the Royals were supposed to, and certainly did, and then some this year. But I don't know what the hell you're telling your franchise if you move Skubal. So I like the fact that they didn't do that deal, even though I'm not really sure that I love their approach to the deadline. The Guardians, Lane Thomas was a good ad. They needed a corner outfielder who can give them some thump. That's a good ad. It's a Guardians type of move. It's like we're going to say the same thing in the NL Central. What are you going to say? What do you expect the Brewers to do? So the Guardians within their realm did a good job with the Thomas move. I like Lane Thomas. I don't know what you're getting. I've always loved Alex Cobb personally. I don't know what you're getting out of Alex Cobb necessarily. They're kind of playing it as it lies and taking it as they have it. Yeah, I thought the Royals really did, maybe of the three, the best job because they don't have the prospect system that some of these other teams do. And they made depth moves. And that's what you need to do. The Royals, you look at the way they've played, you look at some of their starting pitching that they've gotten, and you think about the way Bobby Witt Jr. has played, that vibe and that energy that right now this team has is circa kind of 2014, 2015 with the youth and all of that, albeit Salvi's still there, was the youth then, now a veteran and the captain and the leader. But bringing in Urseg, the Hunter Harvey move, even Lorenzen, who's a depth guy. I like some of the moves they made within the margins they have to deal with. But again, hashtag that's so AL or NL Central in the kind of moves that they made. American League West, interesting. Rangers kind of sit pat. And by the way, I didn't mention the White Sox because they're decrepit. Didn't do enough. Didn't move Robert. I don't know if you had to move Crochet. He certainly took himself off the board some with some of the comments he made. But I don't, they're not in the Rockies land of loser, but I really don't understand the White Sox at all. The good news is they still have the offseason where they can go ahead and fix some of this mess. A lot of the moves they could have made, they were not hampered by free agents to be and pending, UFAs, to use the way you talk about it in hockey. But case in point, Everything the White Sox do is everything the White Sox do. American League West, Texas kind of holding pattern. Wait for DeGrom, get Young back. Now, you sit there and you're hoping that you're healthy enough and maybe you can surprise, but I think they kind of understand where they are if some of that doesn't happen. So we had kind of a two-horse race at the top, and it was fun to watch. And I think, from the Seattle side, they're one of the winners at this deadline to me. Again, if I had to pick one winner from the buyer, one from the seller, I'm going Dodgers and Marlins. But I love what the Mariners did. I did, and look, it remains to be seen. The Astros, Kikuchi could really help them. Bit of an overpay, I think, in what they gave up. But obviously, they're in a spot where they got to win now. They're always in win now mode with the roster that they have. But Seattle, to get a Rosarena, which was, to me, such a need, and offensively so decrepit is this team. But then to add Justin Turner. Now, I don't know what this will become. Who knows what level of Justin Turner they will get, because obviously he's a lot older. This is not the same player that we've seen in the postseasons in the past or in pushes for postseasons in the past when you look at his time with the Los Angeles Dodgers. But immediately you're seeing him pay dividends. I think he drove in a run in his first at bat, if memory serves me correctly, with a single. This is a guy who is great in a room, who knows how to win, who has quality ABs, and always seems to step up when the occasion is at its greatest. And I love the JT move. I thought Justin Turner's addition was fantastic, even though on a smaller end. I love that. So, look, their offense not going to blow anybody over. We know how they're trying to win with starting pitching, but you add a Rosareni, add Justin Turner, you're in a better spot. I also thought the Yimi Garcia move was a nice one as well. They did it. They did a good job. Mariners, to me, one of the winners at the deadline for sure. Your thoughts on the AL side, let me know. Hit me up, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. It's simple. If you're listening and not watching already on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, where you could find me, or the YouTube channel where you can comment, just get over to one of those platforms, subscribe, like, and get in on the comments and let me know your thoughts. Let's go to the NL side. I'll kind of go backwards. Let's start with the Dodgers. Dodgers were the biggest winner at this deadline because the Dodgers had the most pressure at this deadline. I said this before, and I've said this on podcasts over the last number of weeks. Biggest pressure, in terms of your power rankings, if you want to do it that way, were clearly, in some order, Dodgers, Orioles, Yankees were the three that really stood out for me. And the Dodgers at the front end, because the Dodgers have to win, because they have to win a World Series or it's a bust. That's the way it is. And they're a team that is, 8-9 game, whatever it is, ahead in first place. They're going to coast to another division. They're doing it without Yamamoto, without Mookie Betts, with all the pitching injuries, with Buehler, not being himself when he came back, and all the other things that have gone wrong. And look at still where they are. And they got Ohtani, and we're going to get, thank you, Lord, go Ohtani in the playoffs, right? So all this in Betts coming back healthy and everything that's going to be right in front of them. It is right in front of them to make a run, but they can't make a run. They have to win the whole thing. Even if they got to a World Series, yeah, okay, they lose 6 or 7 games to the Orioles or Yankees or whoever, fine. I mean, I think you take it. Anything can happen at that point. It's not necessarily, even though it's disappointing, a disappointment, but anything else is a disappointment. If you're being fair and you look at where the Dodgers are and what their goals were and what they have to do. And they had to go in here with all the starting pitching issues they had last year with the injuries, and then how it went with the Diamondbacks. They could not allow that to happen. They could not sit there and rely on just health, which a lot of the other teams are doing right now, and sitting there and saying, okay, well, I'm just going to sit still and hope I get healthy. So a lot of teams handle it that way. A lot. Diamondbacks are one. You're really waiting for, when you think about Erod and Kelly, right? They get AJ Puck, which is a nice add Josh Bell, which you got to do because of the Walker injury. Did they push enough? I don't know. But the Dodgers had to get the guy, and they got the best starting pitcher who was moved. If you want to say the best available, depends how available you think Skubal and Snell and Crochet were. Crochet seemed to take himself out of the mix. Skubal, to me, was always a pipe dream, and Snell the same thing. So here you go. Because if you were willing to overpay or pay up, depending upon how you look at it, and give exorbitant amounts of your top prospects and give your number one guys and your Jackson Holidays or whoever, those guys could have been still possible. And even then, they wouldn't be guarantees that those trades could be made based on what I'm hearing and what we've all heard these teams were asking for in return. So to go get Jack Flaherty, who, and I posted, if you haven't seen it, I posted it on my my Twitter account, my X account. that, he grew up a Dodger fan. Pictures of him, his mom, who's on Twitter, and I mean, how proud she got to be, pasting pictures very similar. If you see the Islanders above me and you're an Islander fan, of John Tavares and his blankie. This one doesn't upset me nearly, of course, as much or at all. But this is kind of a nice story. Flaherty now gets to pitch for the Dodgers. Immediately, he went to Instagram. He's pumped up. Last year at the deadline, gets moved to the Orioles, had a substandard season for him, but was there and moved because of the potential we knew he had. He's shown that and been that this year, and now that's the guy the Dodgers are adding. They had the best guy who's moved at the deadline, and then they're not done. They add Edman in the same deal, who hasn't played because he's been banged up, but Tommy Edman's a winner and a guy who's like a perfect, like you think about over the years of the Dodgers, the Chris Taylors and the Justin Turners and the guys who, I'll do anything. I'll play anywhere. I'll hit anywhere in the lineup. You'd sit me for 5 days and I'll hit a pinch hit home run or whatever I need. Tommy Edman all up in that. But then if he doesn't get healthy and doesn't play, they bring back Ahmed Rosario, and they also are able to add and fill in that depth utility spot with him as well. Even the Kiermaier move for, nothing, for peanuts, to come back and, maybe, be a factor even defensively. But I love the makeup of Edman and the makeup of Kiermaier added to that culture as well. And, Kopech is another arm to add to that staff to build depth. So Dodgers were busy, headlined by Flaherty, biggest winner at the deadline on paper, clearly, because most pressure, biggest need, filled it. Got to give him a check mark for that. Padres are another winner at this deadline. They are at the Mariner level for me, right underneath, where I'm not putting them as biggest winner, but they're getting A's from me too. And look, AJ Preller, you can go back to when he got Dylan Cease. You can go back to the Luis Arias move. Everybody gets on AJ Preller and shits on him and he's made too many moves and they're not that good. And what's the plan? And all these years that they've been disappointments, but this team keeps going and they keep trying. And if I'm a Padre fan right now, I'm pretty pumped up because you may not know the names if you're not paying attention, but you better pay attention. Go look at what Jason Adam and Tanner Scott have done. First of all, Tanner Scott hasn't allowed a run in his last 17 outings. His ERA is 1.18. His whip is just above 1. His numbers are sick. He's going to be a free agent, but he's right there playing for money, everything on the line, go for it mode, stepping into a situation where he gets to do it on a bigger stage with a chance to get to a postseason. I love the arms that they gave. They're going to need health. We know that, obviously, right? Tatis and Bogarts and Darvish and all the injuries they've had and some that are still on their way back to you, babe. But for the San Diego Padres, I love what they did. Not to forget Martin Perez, depth guy as well, who they bring, a veteran lefty. But I love what they did with bringing in Scott and Adam. They saw the need. And when you want to win late in games, you can go back to the machinations of the Padres a million years ago with Luke Gregerson and Mike Adams and Heath Bell, right? You go to, I don't care how you look at it. The NL West and the postseason in general is the bullpens. You got to find a way between those margins to get big outs late in games and to add these two high leverage guys. I thought it was huge. I thought the Padres did a fantastic job. I really did. Love what they did. Let's go backwards. NL Central. Brewers, look, I like what they did in Brewer-like moves. Frankie Montas, Aaron Savali, these guys aren't going to change your world, but right now they're in first place and they're the team to beat in the division. They don't need to change the world. The Brewers aren't sitting there and saying, what do we do to cut our gap between our roster and the Phillies and the Dodgers? Because they can't afford to do that. I think we all understand that, right? Whether you like it or not, they kind of can't. So for the Brewers, what's the best thing you could do if you're a Brewers fan? Let's see this team make moves that can solidify that we can win this division and give ourselves a shot. And I think these moves did that. They give themselves depth rotation moves. I would have liked to seen a little bit more on the offensive side. They feel great about where they are offensively. Those are the comments made after from the front office. That's fine. I'm not saying it's in bad shape, certainly not where the Mariners are. I don't know that for me, I'm not getting a little bit greedy, because I'm thinking a little bit about versatility for me and at-bats when I get to a postseason if I'm the Brewers. But this was all about, let's make sure we got the innings we need to win these games in August and September and to get ourselves this spot winning the division. I thought they did okay. Pirates were a little bit aggressive. I mean, look, the the De La Cruz, the move that they made to go add finally. I mean, you're thinking 18 home runs, right? A bat who gives them some power and an offense that's decrepit, but kind of like with the Seattle situation, but even worse for Pittsburgh. They're so far off offensively that they needed to make probably 3 moves to make a major difference. So I don't know necessarily if this is going to be enough, but you know what though? When was the last time the Pirates added anything? When was the last time any Pirate fan could say at the deadline? Now, we can go back to the Andrew McCutchen MVP type years where they weren't doing enough. And the John Lesters and the David Prices and all those guys were available, and I was covering those deadlines. And this Pirate franchise and that ownership never put their money literally at all where their mouth is. They talked the big game about trying to get, my guy Clint Hurdle and that team a World Series, but they never seemed to do that. And when it was put up or shut up, they would never go make those big moves. But it's been sell, damage and dumpster fire and everything in between for so long that just to see them buy it all, if you're a Pirate fan, you're pretty pleased, I think, about that. The Cardinals did a nice job. Didn't need to do it in 7 deals. Look, Eric Fedde has had a nice year, and it was a good pickup for them and a good deal. And I don't think they gave up too much to go get it done. Bringing in Tommy Pham, not just because he just hit the grand slam, but a guy who we know is, when he's energized, he brings some big hit moments with him, and he brings some swag with him. And people forget, it didn't end well with the Cardinals, but he spent the year basically being the MVP of that team before everything turned quickly and went the other direction, and then he was gone. And I could tell you personally how much love there was for the Cardinals, because I was hosting and doing an interview on MLB Network Radio when we had him on after that deal, and he was crying because he got moved. I mean, he was emotional. That is how much he cared about St. Louis, and that is how much that whole situation hurt him. So for me, great for Tommy Pham, great for the Cardinals. I like the Fedde move as well. Let's see how the Central plays out. Let's go to the National League East. Let's start with the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies, I thought, did a really good job. I've seen some people put them on the list of losers. I don't really understand that, because maybe people don't understand. The Philadelphia Phillies are best suited to win a World Series of any team in baseball, including the Dodgers, based on the way they look. Why? Because they got big hit capability. They got versatility in the lineup. They got a number of guys who could beat you and hit good pitching. They've got experience. And oh, by the way, let's bury the lead. They got great arms at the front of their rotation with experience, who can go to a postseason and go to another level. And, Robert Thompson's got many, many different guys to choose from that can go out and take the ball in a game they got to win. And especially including, specifically Wheeler at the front end, probably the big game pitcher for me right now in the sport, based on what he's in the last couple of postseasons. So they're already in a spot. They didn't need to do a lot. So to expect the Philadelphia Phillies to go out and have to make a ton of moves didn't make a lot of sense for me. They didn't have to do that. So love the Carlos Estevez move. Love what they did bringing him in. They needed another high leverage arm in that bullpen. They're able to get that. They bring in Tanner Banks as well. Austin Hayes, add a little bit more on the offensive side in terms of versatility. He's got some pop. Already he's hit a big home run in his first couple of games for this team. I like what the Phillies did. The Atlanta Braves were in a very weird spot, because we all expect Alex Anthopoulos to make 700 trades and to do whatever is necessary, because he's been as good, if not better, than any executive has been over the last decade with what he's done with this team. And he didn't get to do all those moves, and he probably didn't have the starting pitching depth I think they need. If they're going to really make a run in the postseason. But he tried to put a bat back in the lineup for an offense that sorely is missing one. And certainly Ronald Acuna Jr., the returning Jorge Soler, is not. But he brings them thump and slug. They desperately need in that lineup. And between, the name, to go back to the distinguished gentleman with Eddie Murphy, and a guy who has been at an MVP caliber level in a postseason for you in the past, and has been a guy who has fit in with this group in the past, it just was a nice fit. And I like the move. I don't know if it's going to be enough. Braves are probably going to get to the playoffs. I'm not saying they won't. And they still have the capability, if they're healthy enough at the front end of the rotation, to hang with. And because of that experience, put pressure on some teams. But I'm not sure that they did enough. I thought missing, no offense to Luke Jackson, some pitching depth I think they missed the boat a little bit there. They didn't need to go to, the Scoobalens or some of these guys who were not, picked up and traded, right? But I think that somewhere in that mid muffin tops of some of that pitching depth that we've seen moved, the Eflins and some of these other names that, the Fetties, the Braves could have used another arm, but I like the Soler move. I think they did a good job. Let's go to the Mets. The Mets did a good job at the deadline, and I'll delve more into this on Bleav in Mets for Met fans who want to catch that new episode coming up here in the next 24 hours. But for the Mets at the deadline, they did a good job, and David Stearns did a good job for where this team is. And where this team is in a surprise season with a Kodai Senga, who they desperately needed and somehow lived without, among other things, who then came back and dominated and now is gone again, at least for the regular season. Who knows if you can even get him back in the postseason. And you're in a spot where you got a real good chance to make the playoffs, and you want to make the playoffs because of, look, and David Stern said it, read between the lines at the press conference that he had after the deadline, and he said it before the season, and he even said, I'm reiterating the same thing I said when I took the job. Our goal this year is what? To be competitive and to make the playoffs. They are still right there in line, and their deadline was a B to B plus in line with let's stay competitive and let's try and take this shot and make the playoffs. It was not a deadline where it was a BB plus or an A in the we're trying to win a World Series. And by the way, the Mets aren't winning the World Series. Mets they don't have enough starting pitching, and they can't, to me, contend with the Phillies and the Dodgers in 7-game series. We'll see, right? Anything can happen. But they didn't take their chance away. They doubled down on, hey, we are not selling. We're not going to stand pat. They could have easily said, hey, look, we're not going to sell because of where we are, but we're not going to add. But they added. Love the Winker move. Needed a left-handed bat. Gives him some power. Gives him some speed as well. Runs the base as well. I thought the Stanek and the Maton moves in the back end of the bullpen, guys with experience who've got arms. And I know it didn't start out well for Stanek in his first appearance, but I think, these are guys who have been there, done that, have experience with the Astros, go in a World Series and all of that. And they'll bring some of that for a team that's got to win important games in September down the stretch. Zuber and Brazaban bringing in another couple of arms. The Mets needed arms for days, and the Diekman experience finally over. They got all these injuries, lost Raley for the year, lost Smith for the year, right? Edwin's starting to kind of look like Edwin, Sugar looking like Sugar again. They needed to kind of step up that setup role, even with Buto down there in the pen, and I like the addition of the moves that they made. The Blackburn move is okay. Is he better than Tyler McGill? He is. Is he good enough to make you feel like this team could go win the first wild card and outlast the Braves the last 6 weeks of the season? I don't think so. Is he good enough to make you feel like, hey, this guy's starting a postseason game and I